To those in our community who demanded change, thank you for speaking up.
To our community, thank you for your partnership as we move forward.
Where we're going to be talking about the consent decree that was recently signed between Louisville Metro Government, the Louisville Metro Police Department, and the U.S. Department of Justice.
At the end of the day, the people of Louisville deserve constitutional and effective policing and nothing less.
Hey y'all, I'm Attica Scott, former Kentucky State Representative, and you're joining me today on Stay Live Streams, where we're going to be talking about the consent decree that was recently signed between Louisville Metro Government, the Louisville Metro Police Department, and the U.S. Department of Justice. Our guest today will be Mr. Ed Harness of the Office of Inspector General. Mr. Harness, thank you so much for joining us today, and good morning to you as well. If you could please tell us a little bit about the work of the Office of Inspector General.
Well, the Office of Inspector General, we've been around for 3.5 years. I've been in my position for just over 3 years. We're a newly formed agency to help with police reforms for Louisville Metro Police Department. We do investigations. We also examine patterns and practices within the department, make policy recommendations. We do the day-to-day work for the Civilian Review and Accountability Board.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to, if you don't mind, go into some questions directly related to the consent decree.
Absolutely.
Because as folks know, it was recently signed last Thursday. So my first question to you is, what was your initial reaction to the press conference last Thursday?
Well, I was first off excited that it was signed and that progress had been made. I think it's a big step forward for the community and for the police reforms that the community has desired. And then some of the aspects from the press conference that I picked up were some of the nuances of this particular consent decree that are different from others. So the ability to come into compliance piecemeal, and the shift of focus in 5 years if there's not a compliance.
Thank you so much for sharing those nuances. I think that's really important to lift up. So I'd like to know, what were your reactions more deeply to the consent decree itself? So as you read through it, if you had a chance to read through it, what have been your reactions?
Well, I've been mainly focused on the paragraphs that affect the Civilian Review and Accountability Board and the Office of Inspector General. I've focused on those because we had a Civilian Review and Accountability Board meeting last week, and I wanted to be prepared to discuss it with them. My initial reaction is that it provides greater transparency. It also provides some enforcement mechanisms for our agency that we haven't had in the past. It also provides for better and greater independence for our agency because we'll be able to administer our own budget, so we're not subject to political whims, so to speak. And we're going to have greater access to information at the department, so it empowers us in a better light.
Good. And you've mentioned a couple of times the Civilian Review and Accountability Board. Can you share a little bit about what that board does?
Sure. There are 11 community members. We just got back to 11 this week. And they are the entity that oversees what we do. If we are to do an investigation, they must authorize it first. They also look at and approve our policy recommendations, and they are the voice of the community.
Wonderful. And you said get back to 11. So is 11 the maximum?
Yes, 11 is the maximum in accordance with the ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you. So your office, as you mentioned, as well as the Civilian Review and Accountability Board, are both mentioned specifically in the consent decree. So were you involved at all with the consent decree process, and if so, in what way?
I was not involved in the negotiations. However, I believe in about August, once the sections of the consent decree that affect our agency, that the Department of Justice and the city thought were in a final phase, they did bring me in to review those and get my feedback before the final distillation of those paragraphs.
Good, excellent, thank you. So that helps to clarify some with your office and the work you do with the Civilian Review and Accountability Board. So we'll dig some more into the consent decree itself.
Okay.
So one issue that continues to be on the minds of some Louisvillians is the ability of the Civilian Review and Accountability Board to have subpoena power. We know that legislation to grant the board subpoena power failed in the General Assembly in 2022. So that was 2 years ago. Can you share with us what the current status is of the ability of the board to have subpoena powers?
It is the same.
Okay.
My hope was that, much like other consent decrees, that the consent decree would mandate subpoena power for the oversight agency. That didn't happen in this case.
Okay.
So it's where it's been.
And so can we talk a little bit about what we need to do to get the board subpoena power?
At this point, my understanding is there has to be a lobbying effort with the state in order to grant that, because they preempted what is in the Metro ordinance.
So for folks who are tuning in, it's important for you to know that you have elected officials in Frankfurt, our state capital, who can be the voices for getting the board subpoena power. So keep that in mind. You have a member of the House, a member of the Senate that you need to be talking to about subpoena power. So each city has its own energy. It's got its own temperament. So can you tell us about the difference between your time in Albuquerque and your time here in Louisville, particularly as it relates to working with subpoena power and other issues that you've noticed have been some differences?
Well, let's see. In both instances, I was coming into a new entity. The entity in Albuquerque was much more progressed and had much greater cooperation from the department. So my job there was to simply establish trust between the oversight entity and the department and allow the work to continue. Here, it was fresh and there was nothing in place. So first we had to establish that. And we did that with the consent decree coming in mind. So all of the trainings, all of the things that we did to formulate, we did under what I believe would be the Department of Justice standards. So I believe we're ready to hit the ground running with this consent decree.
Okay.
However, we haven't enjoyed the same level of cooperation from the department here that I had in Albuquerque. One of the best factors of the consent decree is the mandatory requirement that the department respond to our recommendations within 45 days. Largely, the things that we've done now, our investigations and our recommendations, have gone ignored. And so now the federal court is going to make sure that we get a response. And if they're not going to take our recommendation, then they have to explain why.
Okay. So read the consent decree. You'll see in there some opportunities for more involvement from the Office of Inspector General, more cooperation with the Office of Inspector General with LMPD. We're going to take a quick break, Inspector, and come back to you with some additional questions as it relates to the consent decree.
All right, great.
Hey, I know you're watching the live stream right now, but I want to take a moment to tell you to check out this new book right here over my shoulder. Believe me, it'll be worth it.
The lights of Kentucky Performing Arts shine on more than our shows. They illuminate a pathway of discovery for all throughout our Commonwealth. A pathway of creativity, confidence, possibility, of brilliance, inspiration, curiosity, and wonder. For 40 years, Kentucky Performing Arts has led a pathway to unite the Commonwealth around the joy of discovering the arts, and will continue to shine this light far into the future.
On March 14th of 2023, the then Police Chief Villarreal agreed to a memorandum of understanding. This was a week after the Department of Justice announced their investigation into LMPD on March 8th of 2023. In the Office of Office of Inspector General annual report, it addresses your duties, Mr. Harness, and your powers as it relates to you providing recommendations on improving operations to the Chief of Police, the Mayor, and Metro Council. Can you share with us what your response, what the response from LMPD has been like to your memorandum of understanding, and what was LMPD's response to your recommendations that you've given them over the past few years on improving operations?
We've we've sent over, I think, probably 3 or 4 extensive studies, research by our data analysts relating to the use of force and uh, counting takedowns as far as a reportable use of force. I think we did one on the use of spit shields. We also did one on the use of hobble devices where the legs are restrained. And while we've been told that some of that has been enacted, there's been no official communication back to say, yes, we've received this policy recommendation and we're accepting it in part or partially. Um, we did send an anti-retaliation policy to them that they adopted in peace. That was one of the first things that we did through the Civilian Review and Accountability Board. But largely, it's been, kind of, there's a separation between what we send and what we hear.
Okay, so it sounds like communication can be improved.
Could be, absolutely.
Okay, and do you think that the consent decree will help with improving that communication?
I do. I think that some of the mandatory communication will help with some of the voluntary communication that we need.
Okay, good. So, in reading the consent decree, it seems like the Office of Inspector General and the Independent Monitor will have some similar responsibilities, including making recommendations. What overlap do you see in your responsibilities?
I don't necessarily see overlap
Okay.
in that the monitor is going to be evaluating the work that we do and how we interact with the department and the department interacts with us. The monitor is going to come in and be the umpire, call the balls and the strikes while we do the work. So the monitor isn't necessarily going to overlap and do any of our work. Our work is going to continue.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So, how do you see your role moving forward as the consent decree goes into effect?
Well, I see a lot of improvement from the standpoint of the department and the Office of Inspector General. Will be doing joint community efforts. The department has to promote our agency so that the public and the community understands that we are a resource for complaints. Also, any civilian complaint that will come in now, even if it goes to LMPD, we have to know about it. And so we will have eyes on all civilian complaint investigations that take place, whether we do the investigation or not. That's a huge step. Our budgeting, establishing our independence is big. That's a best practice accepted nationwide for oversight entities. As I've already addressed, the mandatory responses to our recommendations. And then we will have greater access to information when we do our pattern and practice and our evaluations of processes within the department. Those are just a few of the highlights.
That's
Not to
good
mention the fact that we're in the consent decree and we are part of the keys that have to be accomplished.
Okay, thank you for that. So, I'm going to come back to something you mentioned, which is the budget, in just a moment.
Hey guys, before we get back to the live stream, I'm Tracy, the bartender at Southern Hospitality Bar and Grill, located at 3402 West Broadway. You guys got to come and check us out. You can call your order in, and the phone number is 502-822-1474. Again, I'm Tracy, the bartender at Southern Hospitality. Come check us out, guys.
So, Mr. Harness, you mentioned a couple of times about the budget for
Mhm.
the Office of Inspector General. So, on page 186 of the consent decree, it states that Louisville Metro will provide the Civilian Review and Accountability Board and the Office of Inspector General with sufficient resources to perform your duties. It also states that to further ensure your office's ability to provide independent and objective oversight, Louisville Metro will ensure that the Office of Inspector General has the authority to carry forward unspent funds from its budget through the annual operating budget ordinance for use at such time as your office deems necessary. Can you share with us how your office will spend those additional funds when they're allocated from the decree?
Well, I think first we have to establish what that level of funding is going to be. And we will work with the Office of Management and Budget to establish that. My preference would be that we are funded at a percentage of 1%. In Albuquerque, I had 0.05%. Chicago's at 1%. Baltimore's at 1%. So that's a set amount of money that we know comes to us as a block. And as we move forward with the consent decree, we're not sure if our staffing levels are going to change because of the differences in our focus, along with what we would anticipate being more complaints coming in, because I think all can acknowledge that there's been a chilling effect for civilians to come forward and complain
Yes.
about the department. So we would anticipate uh, an increase in complaints. And our monies would be spent uh, to support those activities, along with making sure that we keep up with our training, making sure we maintain our Inspector General certification, and then for lack of a better term, rainy day fund um, is to ensure that if some large catastrophic event within the community were to happen, that we would be able to maintain our operations. Certainly in 2020, when I was in Albuquerque, um, we experienced great shortfall and had to go to the council to get money in order to fulfill our mission. And we don't want to have that kind of delay. We don't want to have to try to contract or do anything like that. We should have those funds on hand.
Absolutely. So you mentioned something that I want to come back to, which is you anticipate an increase in complaints.
Mhm.
Can you share why you think that's going to be the case?
Well, I think that is when you examine any oversight entity coming into place, and when you think about the system that's been in place here, where everyone has to go to the professional standards unit in order to file a complaint, um, that just puts a chilling effect on anybody coming forward, along with other intimidating factors. But now that our office exists with a freer access to the complaint process without the intimidation factor, it's just natural that those complaints will increase.
Okay, that's important. So I want to talk about some things that have happened recently in
Mhm.
the news. So I think most people know about House Bill 5, which for many of us in the community who justice work, we talk about it criminalizing houselessness and poverty. And we also know that part of the reason why the Department of Justice was here was because they were investigating police use of force issues, particularly as it relates to the 2020 protests. Can you talk to us about your connection to these issues around houselessness and people being cited and experiencing abuse and LMPD's use of force issues? Like, how is your office engaged with those issues?
Certainly, I think earlier you asked about whether or not the monitor was going to take place or take part of our role. And I think that the two cases the cases you illustrate, which have been in the news lately involving a lieutenant here with LMPD, the use of force incident involving that officer, uh, the complainant went to the department first and got no redress. So only then did they come to the Office of Inspector General. We did our due diligence, our preliminary investigation. We took it to the board. The board authorized the full investigation. And then once we began our full investigation, only then did the department take it seriously and begin their investigation, which resulted in what he is now appealing for his 20-day suspension. And so we also can undertake the investigation of that pattern of dealing with homelessness, of how the department interacts with that unhoused population. That's something that we can undertake under the consent decree.
Okay. That's important to know. And for people who may not be aware, the most recent news report is around a woman who was houseless and pregnant and actually in active labor when a lieutenant was citing her for camping. And she actually later that day ended up giving birth. So I think that's important for people to know. You can look up the story yourself if you'd like to know more about it. So, Mr. Harness, that's all the questions that I have.
Oh, okay.
So I appreciate you so much for taking the time to be with us. And just to wrap up, I would like to ask you if you have anything directly that you would like to say to Louisvillians, especially folks who you have seen with your own eyes have gotten discouraged by processes that have failed to bring justice around so many issues that we are concerned about as it relates to policing. So do you have any closing comments that you would like to provide to folks?
I think that's a great way to close. The consent decree is a monumental accomplishment. Getting it, hopefully it will be signed soon. I firmly believe it will be signed and it will become a court order. And I've heard the community over the years that I've been here, the 3 years I've been here, the frustration of being down this road before and having the Department of Justice here in 2015 and 2016 and finding that the Department of Justice says our police department is doing great, and then all of a sudden they're coming back and they've got these use of force issues and all these things going on. But what you have now is something that's an enforceable mechanism that's going to be measurable and it's going to be held accountable by the federal court. And my experience is that the federal court will take it very seriously and they will hold the department to the standards that it's agreed to in the consent decree. And I'll just add the caveat of, I worked under a consent decree under the first Trump administration. The Department of Justice, the consent decree, that work did not change. It went on, it went unhindered. And I hope for the same here.
Thank you for bringing up the first Trump administration, because there have been concerns, and I want to acknowledge them, that many of us in the community have about whether or not the second administration will indeed support the consent decree, or will it not support the consent decree. So we're going to remain hopeful that the support will continue to be there. So thank you again so much, Mr. Harness, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Yes. So thank you to everyone who has tuned in to this interview. As you prepare to close out 2024, goodwill, to own your power and to use your voice as we welcome in 2025. So stay healthy, stay safe, but if nothing else, stay live.
If you do nothing else.
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 Stay live.